Friedrich Nietzsche proposed to Lou Salome twice, both times through Paul Rée. The indirection suggests something about the gap between how Nietzsche thought about women in his philosophy and how he actually navigated them in his life. That was the arrangement. The three of them had agreed, in the peculiar configuration they built in Rome that spring, that Rée would serve as intermediary, messenger, the one who moved between. The man who wrote about the will to power, about the drive to express, extend, overcome, create, was unable to bring himself to ask directly. He sent a friend, twice, and twice the friend came back with the same answer. No. What Lou actually said, what she meant by no, is the thing that has been consistently misread for 140 years. The standard version is she was afraid of commitment. She valued her independence too highly for marriage. She was a free spirit who couldn't be contained by convention. It misses the specific thing that she was refusing. She was refusing the transformation that saying yes would have required. Because in 1882, in the world Lou Salome was navigating, saying yes to Nietzsche meant more than just becoming his wife. While Nietzsche may have desired an intellectual equal and found one in Salome, becoming his wife meant becoming the person who managed his illness, copied his manuscripts, protected his schedule, organized his correspondence, and subordinated her own thinking to the service of his. It meant the mind that had left St. Petersburg specifically to remain its own thing, becoming an instrument of someone else's genius. She had already refused that once with Gillow. She would refuse it again and again until the world stopped offering it as the only available option. The no had very little to do with Nietzsche. It was about what yes would have cost. Nietzsche, of course, heard it differently. He heard rejection, personal, specific, directed at him, at his body, illness, the loneliness, his needs. He had been alone for years by 1882. The academic world had destroyed his reputation with his first book. Wagner had received his third book with the suggestion that Nietzsche was clearly ill. He was writing in rented rooms, nearly blind, migraines arriving in waves, increasingly convinced that his work was important and increasingly surrounded by evidence that nobody agreed. Lou arrived, 21 years old, intellectually ferocious, capable of following his thinking wherever it went, pushing back when it needed pushing. He had written to Rée that he was looking for someone who could think with him. Here she was, the person he described before he knew she existed. Of course he proposed. What else was a man like that to do? And when she said no, twice, through the same intermediary, what he heard was, "You were not enough. Your mind is remarkable, but your life is unacceptable. Your loneliness is too great, your illness too consuming, your need too visible." He heard the thing he was most afraid of hearing. The summer of 1882 was the closest thing to what Nietzsche had wanted. The three of them traveled together, Lou, Rée, Nietzsche, through Switzerland and Germany. The conversations were deep. Lou later described them as among the most intellectually alive experiences of her life. Nietzsche was writing the gay science. The ideas were moving. The thinking was happening. She took notes. She was thinking too, and the thinking was worth recording. Lou was thinking alongside them, recording what she thought, forming her own positions, disagreeing when she disagreed. Nietzsche would later call that summer the most hopeful of his life. She would later describe it as one of the most intellectually productive of hers. The same summer, two entirely different experiences of what it was. Then Elizabeth arrived, Nietzsche's sister, the woman who would later take his manuscripts and hand them to the people he had spent his life warning against. In 1882, she was simply a sister who loved her brother with a possessiveness that had no room for rivals, and who read Lou Salome as a rival the moment she encountered her. What Elizabeth did was talk. She talked to Nietzsche, to their mother, to anyone who would listen. Lou was immoral. Lou was manipulative. Lou was using Nietzsche's name and reputation for her own advancement. Lou had led him on and then refused him, and was now humiliating him by continuing to exist in his circle. None of it was true, yet all of it landed. Nietzsche was already wounded, already hearing the no as personal condemnation, already vulnerable to the story that someone was to blame for his loneliness and pain and the gap between the magnitude of what he was doing and the silence in which he was doing it. Elizabeth gave him a story. He half believed it, then he didn't believe it, then he believed it again. The letters in this period are painful to read, a brilliant mind oscillating between clarity about what Lou actually was and the wound's insistence on a simpler narrative. By the end of 1882, it was over. The triangle dissolved. Lou and Rée left together. Nietzsche returned to his rented room, migraines, and solitude. He wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra the following year. The book is full of her. She is mentioned nowhere in it. It is her presence, the ideas they had argued through that summer, the positions she had pushed him toward, the thinking that had happened because she was there to think against. She is in the book as the thing that made the book possible. She went home and she wrote. She kept thinking, kept following the ideas that summer had generated, the questions that the conversations had opened, the threads that she had been pulling on, her own before she met him, and would keep pulling long after. In 1894, 5 years after Nietzsche's collapse and turn, 4 years after his sister took control of the archive, Lou Salome published the first serious philosophical study of Nietzsche's work, a philosophical study that was rigorous, engaged, arguing with his ideas on their own terms. It remains one of the most penetrating things written about him. She understood his work better than almost anyone who encountered it in his lifetime because she had thought alongside it, as a philosopher in her own right who found his questions genuinely interesting and his answers genuinely incomplete. She wrote the book because she had thought with him and then kept thinking without him.